the keeper of silent things. The key was cold in his pocket, a familiar solid weight against his thigh. Silas carried it with him always, along with the others on the iron ring, though he hadn't needed to use this particular one in over a decade. It was for the old boathouse, a crumbling skeleton of warped wood and rusted nails that hunched at the far end of the lake like a sleeping beast. Every morning, rain or shine, Silas walked the perimeter of the water. It was a ritual, a duty. He was, in his own quiet way, the keeper of this place. The lake, the woods, the forgotten paths, they whispered to him and he listened. Today the whispers were uneasy. A late autumn wind, sharp with the promise of frost, skated across the water, chopping the surface into 1,000 glittering shards. It tugged at the hem of his worn waxed coat and hissed through the bare branches of the oaks. He paused where the reeds grew thick, his eyes scanning the opposite shore. The new people were at the Alda house again. He could see the distant vibrant splash of a blue tarp covering a section of the roof, and the tiny ant-like figures moving around. They'd bought the place in the summer, a young couple from the city, all bright smiles and loud laughter that echoed across the water on still evenings. They talked of open-plan living and bringing the outside in. Silas didn't understand. The outside, in his experience, did not wish to be brought in. It wished to be left alone. He was turning to continue his walk when a flicker of movement at the boathouse caught his eye. Not the wind, something else. Figure. Silas went still. No one came here. The locals knew better. The lake was for fishing, for walking dogs, but the old boathouse belonged to Silas, and to the past. It was understood. Squinting, he watched. The figure, a woman he thought, was pacing along the rotting dock, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of a dark coat. She stopped, looked out at the water, then down at her phone, its screen a pale, futile rectangle in the gray morning light. Even from this distance, her posture screamed a frantic, trapped energy. She was looking for something. Or someone. A low dread, cold and heavy, settled in Silas's gut. The lake's whispers became a murmur of warning. He considered turning away, retreating back to his cottage, to the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the gentle sigh of the kettle on the stove. His world was one of careful quiet, and this woman was a discordant note. But the key was cold in his pocket, and a keeper kept watch. With a sigh that misted in the air, he changed direction, his boots crunching on the gravel path that curved around the lake towards the boathouse. As he drew closer, details emerged. She was young, maybe in her late 20s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, strands of it whipping across her face in the wind. She wasn't dressed for a walk. City shoes, already smeared with mud, and a thin coat that did nothing against the chill. She hadn't seen him yet. She was staring at her phone, shaking it slightly as if that would conjure a signal from the cold air. "It won't work here," Silas said. His voice, rarely used, was a rough gravel of sound. She started, whirling around, her eyes wide. They were red-rimmed, whether from the wind or from crying. He couldn't tell. For a moment, she just stared at him, an old man in a battered coat emerging from the trees like a ghost. I'm sorry," she stammered, clutching her phone to her chest. "The signal," Silas said, nodding towards the device. "It doesn't reach this end of the lake. The hills." He gestured vaguely towards the granite slopes that cradled the water. "Oh." The sound was small, defeated. She looked back at the phone's blank screen as if it had personally betrayed her. I was supposed to meet someone. He said to meet him here. At the old boathouse." Silas said nothing. He just watched her, his pale, watery eyes taking her in. The nervous tap of her finger on the phone, the way her gaze kept darting towards the dark, still water of the lake. "My brother," she added, filling the silence he left. "His name is Leo. He's been staying out here. Said he found a place to rent. He told me to come this morning. That it was important." Her words were coming faster now, tumbling out. "But he's not here. And he's not answering. He always answers." The dread in Silas's stomach tightened. He knew every soul who lived around the lake. There were no new rentals. No Leos. "There's no house here," he said, his voice low. "Not for years." The color drained from her face. "What?" No, he was specific. "The old boathouse on Blackmere Lake." He sent a pin. She thrust the phone towards Silas, as if he could see the phantom pin on the dead screen. "This is Blackmere," Silas said. "But there's no one here." Her breath hitched, a sharp, frightened sound. She looked from him to the dilapidated boathouse, its door sealed with a heavy padlock. His padlock, and then to the deep, dark water. The wind chose that moment to gust, moaning through a crack in the boathouse boards. The sound was lonely and full of sorrow. Silas felt the key in his pocket, cold and certain. He knew every story this lake held, every secret it had swallowed. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the autumn wind, that the brother named Leo had not chosen this place by accident. He had been led here, and now so had she. "You should come away from the water, miss," Silas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Come up to the cottage. I'll make tea." He didn't wait to see if she followed. He simply turned and began walking back along the path, the keeper returning to his hearth, a new and troubling silence following close behind. She did follow. He could hear the hesitant crunch of her unsuitable shoes on the gravel path behind him, a staccato rhythm against the steady, sure thump of his own boots. The wind, now at their backs, pushed them towards the cottage as if it, too, wanted this conversation moved to a safer, more contained space. Silas's cottage sat in a clearing 100 yards from the lake's edge, a low stone building with a slate roof mossy with age. Smoke curled from the chimney, a pale gray ribbon against the darker gray of the sky. It looked less like a house and more like a natural outcropping that had learned to keep the rain out. He pushed the heavy oak door open, and the smell of wood smoke, dried herbs, and beeswax flowed out to meet them, the scent of Silas. "In," he said, not unkindly, but with the directness of a man and used to company. The woman, she had given no name, paused on the threshold, her eyes sweeping over the dim interior. It was a single room, dominated by a large stone fireplace where a peat fire glowed. A worn armchair was pulled close to the hearth, a blanket folded neatly over its arm. Bookshelves bowed under the weight of volumes, not just on shelves but in stacks on the floor, on a small wooden table on the windowsill. There were no pictures on the walls, but strange objects occupied every other available surface. A collection of smooth gray. She stepped inside, and Silas closed the door, shutting out the wind and the growing chill. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the deep, rhythmic tick-tock of a grand wooden clock in the corner. "Sit," he instructed, nodding towards a sturdy wooden chair by the table. He moved to the black iron kettle sitting on a trivet near the fire and gave it a push, settling it more firmly into the embers. She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was shivering. Silas took a second mug from a hook, a chipped earthenware thing, and dropped a tea bag into it. He waited in silence for the kettle to sing. "My name is Clara," she said finally, her voice small in the quiet room. Silas nodded but didn't turn. "Silas. Silas," she repeated, testing the name. "Thank you. For the tea. I don't know what's happening. I'm sorry to intrude." The kettle began a low whistle, which built quickly to a sharp scream. Silas lifted it and poured the boiling water into the mugs, the steam clouding the air between them. He brought her mug over and set it down in front of her, then retrieved a small jar of honey and a spoon. "Your brother," he said, returning to his chair by the fire. "What does he do?" Clara wrapped her hands around the mug, grateful for the heat. "He's a writer. A journalist, really. Freelance. He was working on a story. He said it was big. The biggest thing he'd ever chased." She took a shaky breath. "He's been different lately. Agitated. Paranoid almost. He kept talking about patterns in the silence. I thought it was just stress. Then 3 days ago he went quiet. No texts, no calls. Then yesterday this one message came through. She fumbled for her phone, swiping it awake to show him a blank screen. The battery's dead. But it said, Clara, Blackmere Lake, the old boathouse. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. It's important. Tell no one. Silas stared into the depths of his tea. Patterns in the silence. The phrase sent a cold trickle down his spine. The lake was full of patterns. The way the ice cracked in winter. The specific language of the birds at dawn. The way the fog gathered in the hollows first. But only a listening ear could hear the darker patterns. The things that were missing. The fish that avoided a certain deep spot. The way the dogs sometimes refused to walk a particular path. The stories that were told in whispers in the village pub. About lights in the woods and lost hikers who were never found. What was his story about? Silas asked, his voice low. He wouldn't say. Not specifics. He said it was safer if I didn't know. He just said it was about the things people leave behind. Not physical things. Other things. Energy. Memories. She looked around the room at Silas's collections. He would have loved this place. All these silent things. They are not all silent, Silas said, almost to himself. Clara's eyes snapped to his, a new fear dawning in them. What do you mean? He didn't answer directly. Instead he asked, the people he was writing about, were they dangerous? I don't know. He said they were powerful. That they didn't like loose ends. Her voice broke on the last word. She looked down into her tea. But Silas saw the tear that escaped and traced a path down her cheek. The grandfather clock ticked on, measuring the silence. Loose ends, the phrase hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Silas set his mug down with a definitive click. He rose and walked to the fireplace, reaching up to the mantel. His fingers brushed past the smooth stones and closed around a small, tarnished silver compass. It was old, the glass face scratched, the needle trembling within. He didn't need it for directions. He knew every inch of this land. But the needle didn't always point north. Sometimes it pointed to other things. Things that were lost. He turned back to Clara, who was watching him. Her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning terrifying hope. The lake keeps its secrets, Silas said. His voice a low rumble. But sometimes it gives them back. He held up the compass. The needle, instead of pointing towards the door and the world outside, was pointing directly at Clara. You said your brother was a loose end, Silas said, his pale eyes holding hers. The silence around here. It has a pattern. And right now, the pattern is pointing at you. The needle held steady, a sliver of silver aimed at Clara's heart. She stared at it, her confusion momentarily overriding her fear. What is that? What does it mean? Silas ignored the question, his focus absolute. He tilted the compass, turned it on its side. The needle wobbled but stubbornly corrected itself, refusing to be swayed from its new north. A cold certainty settled over him. The lake had accepted an offering. It was rarely wrong. It means the story isn't over, he said, his voice grim. He tucked the compass into his pocket, where it lay beside the cold iron key. And you are now a part of it. He moved to the window, pushing aside a stack of books to peer out through the leaded glass. The world outside was a watercolor of gray and brown, the lake a sheet of hammered lead. Everything was still. Too still. The wind had died completely. We need to go, he said, turning back to her. Go. Go where? I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening. Clara's voice rose, edged with panic. That's just a compass. It's broken. My brother is missing and you're playing games with antiques. This is no game. Silas's tone was flint, sharp enough to cut through her hysteria. Your brother came here chasing a story about things people leave behind. He found them. And the people who left those things behind found him. They are not people who leave loose ends. You said it yourself. He took a step towards her, and for the first time, she saw not just a reclusive old man, but something else. a deep, patient strength like the roots of the ancient oaks. They know he contacted you. They will assume he told you everything. They will come here. To the place he last was. To the last person he spoke to. The color drained from Clara's face again, leaving her pale as chalk. The logic was brutal and inescapable. "The boathouse," she whispered. "They'll go to the boathouse." "Yes. But we should call the police." "And tell them what?" Silas asked, his eyebrow raised. "That a compass pointed at you. That the lake feels uneasy. They will come, eventually. They will ask questions. And while they are asking, the people who are already on their way will be watching. They will see the police. And they will wait. They are very good at waiting." He went to a heavy oak chest in the corner and lifted the lid. Inside, instead of blankets, were more books, but also oilcloth packages and a few tools that looked old and well cared for. He pulled out a long, wicked-looking knife in a leather sheath and strapped it to his belt beneath his coat. The action was so calm, so practiced, it was more frightening than if he had brandished it. Clara watched, her breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she breathed. "I am the keeper of this place," he said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps to him it did. He tossed her a heavy whack. "Your city coat is useless." Dazed, she stood and shrugged into the stiff, cold jacket. It smelled of peat smoke and pine. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice muffled by the collar. "Into the silence," Silas said, opening the door. The world outside was preternaturally quiet, holding its breath. "The lake has given us a direction. We must follow it before others arrive to muddy the water." He stepped outside, and after a terrified heartbeat, Clara followed. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a held breath, a concealed threat. Every rustle of a leaf, every distant cry of a bird, felt like a signal. Instead of heading back towards the lake, Silas struck out away from the water, towards the dense, dark wall of the woods. There was no path that Clara could see, but he moved with an unerring confidence, his boots finding purchase on the mossy ground. She stumbled after him, the oversized jacket snagging on brambles. "What are we looking for? What could the compass possibly be pointing to out here?" "Not what," Silas said, not breaking his stride. "Ooh. The needle doesn't point to things. Points to seeking. Plus, right now, it is pointing to you because you are seeking your brother. But if he is still alive and still seeking to be found?" He paused, glancing back at her, his expression unreadable. "The needle may yet turn." The woods closed around them, the canopy thickening overhead, plunging them into a greenish twilight. The air grew cold and damp. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the immense, watching silence. She was following a stranger with a magical compass and a knife into the deep woods, fleeing from a danger she couldn't see, towards a brother who might already be gone. And the only thing she knew for certain was that the old man in front of her, the keeper of silent things, was the only solid ground in a world that had suddenly turned to water. The woods were a cathedral of silence, and every snapping twig under Clara's feet was a blasphemy. Silas moved like a shadow, his passage a whisper against the damp ferns and thick moss. Clara struggled to keep up, her breath pluming in the cold, thin air. The oversized jacket was a prison, its weight dragging at her shoulders, but it held the biting chill at bay. She focused on the compass in Silas's hand. He checked it every few minutes, his movements quick and efficient. Each time, the needle remained stubbornly fixed on her. It was a physical weight, a tether of dread pulling her forward into the unknown. "How far?" she gasped, her lungs burning. "Distance isn't the measure," Silas murmured, his eyes scanning the tangled undergrowth ahead. "Intent is. We are getting closer to the heart of the seeking." The heart of the... What does that even mean? Frustration and fear made her voice sharp. Before he could answer, a sound cut through the woods. Not a natural sound. It was the distant, mechanical growl of an engine, then the definitive slam of a car door. It came from the direction of the lake. From the direction of his cottage. Silas froze. Clara crashed into his still form, and he threw out an arm to steady her, his grip like iron. His head was cocked, listening. The silence of the woods, which had felt so oppressive moments before, now felt like a fragile shield. "They're here," Clara whispered, the words tasting of ash. Silas didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. He looked down at the compass. The needle trembled, then gave a slow, deliberate shudder. It swung a quarter turn away from Clara, pointing deeper into the woods, towards a dense thicket of blackthorn and hawthorn. A jolt, like a weak electric current, passed through Silas. He looked from the compass to the thicket, his pale eyes widening almost imperceptibly. "It's turning," Clara breathed, a wild, terrible hope flaring in her chest. "Silas, it's turning." "Quiet," he ordered, his voice a low thrum of tension. He wasn't looking at the thicket anymore. He was looking at the ground around it. His eyes traced patterns only he could see, the way the moss grew over a fallen log, the particular scatter of pine cones, the faint, almost invisible depression in the earth that curved away from them. He took a step forward, then stopped, holding up a hand. "Don't move." "What is it?" "A story," he said, his voice barely audible. "A bad one. Left here on purpose." He knelt, brushing away a layer of damp leaves with a careful hand. Beneath them, half buried in the loam, was a circle of pale, knotted twine, tied with 9 complex, ugly knots. Woven into it were fragments of bone and sharp, rusted iron. It smelled of old soil and something else, something metallic and sour. Clara recoiled. "What is that?" "A warning. Keep away." For most people it works. They feel a deep wrongness and turn back without knowing why. He looked up at her, his expression grave. "For your brother, a journalist chasing a story about hidden things, it would have been a beacon." He stood, avoiding the cursed circle, and edged around the thicket, the compass held out before him. The needle now pointed straight into the heart of the thorny growth. "Leo!" Clara called out, her voice hushed but desperate. "Leo, are you in there?" Only the silence answered. Silas began pulling at the thorny branches, his thick gloves protecting his hands from the worst of it. "Help me!" Clara joined him, wincing as a thorn scored a line across her cheek. Together they tore at the natural barricade, revealing a narrow, dark opening, not a cave but a steep, eroded sinkhole hidden by the overgrowth. The smell that wafted out was cold and damp, carrying the faint, coppery tang of blood. And then a sound. A weak, shuddering breath from the darkness below. "Leo!" Clara screamed, scrambling forward. Silas caught her arm, pulling her back. "Wait." He took a small flashlight from his pocket, an old metal-bodied thing, and shone it into the hole. The beam illuminated a nightmare. 10 feet down, lying on a bed of wet leaves and mud, was a young man. His face was pale and smeared with dirt and dried blood, one eye swollen shut. His clothes were torn. One arm was bent at a sickening angle, but his chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. Clamped around his ankle, biting deep into the flesh, was a rusted iron trap, its vicious teeth dark and stained. It was an old thing, a relic from a time when trappers worked these woods, but it had been set recently. And with purpose. "Oh God! Leo!" Clara's voice was a broken sob. Leo's one good eye fluttered open, squinting against the light. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound emerged. Silas was already moving, shrugging out of his coat. "He's been here at least a day. The trap. It's not for animals. It's to hold him. To keep him for them." He looped his coat around a sturdy root at the mouth of the sinkhole. "I'm going down. When I say you pull. Understand?" Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Silas lowered himself into the hole, his boots finding purchase on the muddy walls. He dropped the last few feet, landing lightly beside the trapped man. He spoke in a low, calm murmur that Clara couldn't hear. Above Clara, they were out of time. Clara! Silas's voice floated up, tense but controlled. Now, pull! The world shrank to the strain in Clara's arms and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Silas had braced himself beneath Leo's shoulders, taking the weight of the wounded man and the cruel, anchoring weight of the trap. Clara pulled on the waxed coat, her boots slipping in the mud, every muscle screaming. It was a grotesque slow-motion birth from the earth itself. Leo cried out, a short, guttural sound of agony as his broken arm was jostled, then stifled it, biting down on his lip until it bled. His one good eye was wide with a terror that went far beyond the pain. Finally they breached the edge. Leo collapsed onto the wet leaves, chest heaving, his body racked with shivers. The rusted iron trap was still locked on his ankle, a grotesque shackle. The footsteps were closer now, no longer cautious. They'd found the torn thicket. Silas didn't waste a second. He hauled Leo up, slinging the younger man's good arm over his shoulders. The trap stays for now. We can't pry it here. Run or we all die in this hole. Clara grabbed Leo's other side, taking as much of his weight as she could. He was surprisingly light, all lean muscle and bone, but a dead weight of pain and shock. Together they stumbled away from the sinkhole, crashing through the undergrowth in a direction only Silas seemed to know. Behind them a voice cut through the woods. Here. The hole's been opened. It was a flat, professional tone, devoid of emotion. A second voice, colder, answered. Find them. The sound of a bullet being chambered echoed obscenely in the quiet woods. Fear injected a new, desperate strength into Clara's limbs. They half-dragged, half-carried Leo deeper into the trees, away from the path, away from any logic of escape. Silas moved with a feral certainty, angling towards the sound of water they couldn't yet see. A shout erupted behind them, followed by the explosive crack of a gunshot. A branch splintered off a tree to their right. Faster, Silas grunted, his breath coming in short, controlled gasps. They burst through a final wall of ferns and stumbled onto the narrow, pebbled shore of a stream that fed into the main lake. It was wider and faster moving than Clara expected, cutting a deep channel through the forest. Through the water, Silas commanded. It breaks the trail. Hurry! They plunged in. The cold was a physical blow, stealing the breath from Clara's lungs. The water surged to their thighs, pulling at their legs, the current strong and insistent. Leo gasped, his head lolling, his consciousness fading in and out. The iron trap scraped against the stream bed with a horrible grating sound. They sloshed and stumbled downstream for 50 nightmarish yards, the water numbing their legs and washing the mud from Leo's wounds, the clear water blooming pink around them. Here, Silas said, angling towards the far bank where the roots of a massive fallen oak tree created a tangled cave overhanging the water. They scrambled underneath, collapsing into the dark, damp space behind the curtain of roots. The sound of the stream was magnified, a roaring shield around them. They huddled together in the dark, dripping and shivering. Clara clamped a hand over her own mouth to silence her panting breaths. Leo was unconscious again, a dead weight between them. Silas was perfectly still, his head tilted, listening. The footsteps reached the stream bank upstream from them. 2 pairs. They stopped. Lost them, the first voice said, frustration edging into his professional calm. The water. They can't have gone far. He's hurt. Split up. You go downstream. I'll check this side. They'll have to come out eventually. The footsteps separated. One set crunched along the pebbles on the far side, moving past their hiding spot without a pause. The other began slogging through the water itself, coming downstream, towards them. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could see the man's legs through the lattice of roots, his black trousers dark with water. He was moving slowly, carefully, scanning both banks. He was 10 feet away, then 5. Silas's hand moved slowly to the knife at his belt. His expression in the dim light was not one of anger, but of a profound, weary resolve. The keeper prepared to defend his charge. The man stopped right in front of their hiding place. He was so close Clara could see the droplets of water on his trousers. He turned, looking directly at the tangled mass of roots. For a heart-stopping second he paused, his head cocked. Then, from further downstream, a shout. "Hey! Over here! Blood on the rocks!" The man in front of them immediately turned and splashed away, following the sound of his partner's voice. Silas's grip on the knife relaxed. He let out a long, slow breath. He had nicked his own palm with the knife and let a few drops of his blood fall into the current, a small offering to mislead the predators. They waited in the dripping silence for what felt like an eternity, until the sounds of the men faded completely downstream. In the dark, Leo stirred, his voice a raw whisper. "Clara! I'm here, Leo. I'm here," she whispered back, clutching his hand. "The story," he rasped, his words slurred with pain and exhaustion. "The water. It wasn't the lake. It was the source, the old spring. The things they buried. It's in the water." His eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell silent again. Clara looked at Silas, her own eyes wide with a new kind of dread. Silas was staring out through the roots at the stream, his face a mask of grim understanding. The silent things weren't just in the earth anymore. They were in the water that fed the lake, the water that fed the whole valley.